Okay. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Master Planning of Resources, sponsored by the Florida West Coast chapter of APIX. Just 1 second here. Okay, sorry about that. I'm Greg Foskey, and I'll be your presenter for today's program. As James mentioned, my company is Technology Transfer Services. We provide consulting. We provide training in all aspects of operations. That includes supply chain as well as maintenance. So first, I'd like to thank Mr. James Moore and Lindsay Miller for handling all of the logistics for today's program. This program should be approximately 45 minutes, given the number of questions that we might have. If anyone has questions during the webinar, as James mentioned, please send them to me using the chat function. We'll have a quick Q&A session at the end. And if you're calling in, please mute your phones for me so that we can limit the amount of background noise. If after this webinar you're interested in a deeper dive into the information provided today, what we're going to be doing is conducting a class on this very subject matter, Master Planning of Resources. We're going to be starting on Saturday, April 9th in the Tampa, Florida area, specifically Carrollwood area. This program, this course, along with others, is also designed to provide relevant information for those of you that want to use it to pass the APIX CPIM exam. If interested, give me a call. My work number is 813-908-1100. You'll see my email address in the lower left-hand corner of most of the slides. You can contact me that way as well. At the end, I'll have some contact information showing up during the Q&A, so no need to take it down now. So during today's webinar, we're going to be talking about the various facets of Master Planning of Resources, looking at the various forecast techniques, systems used. We're also going to look at customer service and customer relations, order management, as well as those things that have the greatest influence on the master production schedule. So, okay, some of you have seen this before. This is my version of end-to-end supply chain. We need to understand the term supply chain. As this illustration shows, the supply chain is a network. It includes suppliers, manufacturers, distributors, dealers, customers, distribution centers, outside warehouses, etc. To be most effective, all of these appropriate parties will need to contribute value in their own areas, but you're also going to need to be contributors in the cross-functional relationships. So this is why the slide. Even though the product flow is primarily from the left to the right, and cash flow is primarily from the right to the left, what you see at the top is that information flows both ways across the entire supply chain. Accurate information flowing in a timely manner is one of the most critical needs of any effective supply chain. Manufacturing companies have varying degrees of complexity. In almost all cases, they require planning, procedures, and systems that mirror that complexity, the complexity of the operations as well as supporting the supply chain partners. Relating to the overall topic of master planning of resources, we see the box labeled S&OP. This stands for Sales and Operations Planning. We'll talk about this area in more detail later in the webinar. But in the performance of their functions, it's important to note that this group must take into consideration the company's strategic and business plans. Once the S&OP team agrees on a plan by product group, what they're going to do is they're going to feed this information to master scheduling, who's going to break it into a production schedule by end item. We'll talk about that in more detail in a little bit. Sales and operational planning and master scheduling both receive information from the demand and the supply side in order to be assured that there's a balance. Once the S&OP and master scheduling activities have been completed, they also feed this updated information back to the supply and demand areas. So here we go through the APIX version of the manufacturing planning hierarchy. Starting at the top, with the company's strategic and business plans, we move into significant long and intermediate term activities in the blue region of the chart that just popped up for you. This group of functions is collectively referred to as master planning of resources. You can see that in the yellow text. And this area is going to be the topic of today's webinar. So to the left, again, we talked about the demand side. You can see more detail on the demand and distribution functions that feed information in to S&OP and master scheduling. Likewise, on the operations side on the right, where we see capacity-related information being fed in for the plant and the operations processes. In an effort to balance demand and maximize supply throughput, S&OP and master scheduling take this information from both sides and incorporate it into their planning logic. Now, we're not going to talk about this area today, but I just want to let you know that filling out this whole manufacturing planning hierarchy, there are detailed areas that will come up in subsequent webinars. The detailed scheduling and planning, the execution and control, all of the associated activities that are near term. We'll focus on these in the future. So customers and suppliers have different perspectives on performance, but in the end, both need the other ones to meet their own objectives in order for the relationship to work. By understanding the perspectives from both ends of the supply chain, we're going to be able to better meet their needs. Here we see what customers and suppliers want in order to consider their relationship to be successful. A customer is looking for the right goods and services, right? But they're also wanting them to be the right quality, the right quantity, the right time, place, and price. Suppliers, on the other hand, want to make sure that they provide competitive and acceptable levels of customer service, but they want to do this in a way that they efficiently use their resources and with the appropriate, I guess, lowest level of inventory investment possible. To provide the best service, a company's key customers and suppliers should be active participants in various planning activities for the company. To be the most effective, supply and demand must be balanced. Otherwise, what we're going to see is suboptimal performance. If demand exceeds the capacity to fulfill it, the results are going to look like poor customer performance. The company is going to incur high expediting costs, high overtime costs. On the other side, if the company has been taking advantage of, say, higher capacity and produces more earlier than the customer requires, the result could be inventory levels that are going to be unnecessarily high, and later on, potential layoffs, maybe cutback associated costs are going to increase. So in either case, the company is going to experience a reduction in profit margins, looking at one side or the other. During the intermediate to long-term planning periods, sales and operational planning process coordinates the input from a number of departments in order to provide a better overall plan. Also, at the S&OP level, the plan is developed as an aggregation of demand from all sources. Beyond hard customer orders, this can include internal company needs, distribution center inventory replenishment plans, where the distribution centers might be saying that they need more inventory, but you can't see a hard customer order going through them. They want warehouse in their inventory in their warehouses as well. Pipeline fill, so you've got new products going out, maybe new customers. You need to have a demand that's going to fill that pipeline. New product introductions and design changes. Once the planning hierarchy and its associated information flow is established, planning and control can occur across a wide time range. Excuse me. There are many things that go into the planning and control, including the different resources and technologies used at various points in time. Here are some of the issues in their planning horizons. So, starting at the top right box, we can see that through strategic and business planning, along with S&OP, we're provided with the information necessary to make appropriate technology and resource decisions. These required resources and technologies must be approved. So top management's going to look at these things. They're going to say, this is going to cost a lot of money. I want to make sure that it has an appropriate payback justification. So they have to be approved and made available. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to meet the needs of our strategic plan, make our production plans. So the decisions at this level usually cover at least several years. The next area we're going to talk about, we'll talk about this area in a little bit more detail than most during this session, is distribution planning. Distribution networks need to be put in place so that once products are manufactured, the products can be efficiently and cost-effectively delivered to the right places at the right time. So the network decisions, such as where to put facilities, equipment, and other resource requirements need to be part of a company's long-term logistics considerations for their make-to-stock items. You can see that down at the bottom. You see this timeline with near, intermediate, and long-term, and how the decisions on your distribution network cross over between long and intermediate term. So after both of these are addressed, then we can start looking at things on an annual basis, things where the operations folks are normally involved. Salespeople are going to talk about annual sales projections. Those sales projections are going to drill down into annual budgets and annual look at the production plans. Finally, we get into the execution and control side of things, and resources are going to be managed on a daily basis here. So you see that in the bottom. The near term, we're going to be talking about days, maybe weekly time buckets out after the fourth week. So master level activities can span years. In the upper right, detailed planning and control activities typically cover several months or quarters. A rule of thumb that can be used for this area relates to lead time. So detailed planning in this area should cover at least the longest aggregate lead time plus one planning cycle. So say you have a product, your longest lead time product is a 20-week lead time, and you have a planning cycle where you do your planning every week. So at least once a week you're going to see something happen if there's a major change in your demand requirements within a week's period of time. What happens here is the company should have a detailed plan that covers at least 21 weeks. Supplementing that, in many cases, a company is going to be covering the uncertainty in this period with some type of safety stock. On the execution and control activities, we talked about them being planned out daily and weekly. So back to the distribution side of things, when we look at distribution planning, you can see that we've got, this is a simple illustration, but it shows three different ways to look at your options. You can either go direct to the customer, you can use select distribution, or you can even be more complex than that. So when designing a distribution network, like just presented back in step 2, right? A manufacturer may choose to ship directly to customers, to use selective channels, or have a complex level of distribution. It depends on what their purpose is. These decisions depend on many factors, including what customer expectations are, the costs associated with each alternative, local and regional sub-channel design requirements, and even codependence factors, dependence of one company to another. Other factors to consider are product variety, channel dependency, and end-user lead time. The decision on which way to establish a distribution network also impacts your carriers, impacts your carrier and transportation model choices, and decisions on which logistics and warehouse management systems, again, getting into systems, will be used. In general, we can look at the simple one. So let's just focus on the left side, the simple distribution method. That would be used for products like OEM products, say aircraft engines. So the group that best fits this simple model are products that are engineered to order and made to order products, typically one-for-one expectation of customer demand to one particular product. Select distribution can be used for make to order, assemble to order, and make to stock items. An example of this group would be automobile dealership networks. You're not going to sell every type of car through every type of dealership. You're going to have a selected group of dealers who are going to be authorized to sell your product. Finally, on the complex distribution networks, you're looking at Alibaba, Amazon. All of these complex groups are designed for make-to-stock items. So make-to-stock items can be items like prepackaged frozen dinners, bicycles, wristwatches, things like that, where you want to have them very close for impulse buys, very close where customers are demanding very, very short lead times. That's where you want your the complex multi-level distribution centers. But we're going to get into a lot more of that type of detail in the upcoming APICS class. So as mentioned earlier, sales and operational planning, the process itself is given direction through communication of the company's core strategic and business plans. And that's what I have in the middle here. In the core is S&B stands for strategic and business. That's at the heart of the matter. Once established, sales and operational plans then support resource planning, demand management, distribution planning, and master scheduling. But it also provides directly, as well as through the master scheduling process, information from for other sales, financial, and production plans. And you see that in the outermost layer. This illustration makes it obvious, though. The key to this is that it makes it obvious why the executives who put together the company's strategic and business plans need to be the champions and sponsors of that S&OP process. So now demand management has three major components. We see it here: order management, customer relationship management, or CRM, and forecasting. Order management is simply the receiving and processing of orders, prioritization, making sure that they get out to the shop floor in time. Customer relationship management is a business process used to understand and anticipate customer demand. Forecasting uses there are a number of different ways to deal with forecasts, using both qualitative, quantitative information, and this is used to support both master scheduling and distribution inventory stocking requirements. So we talked about that as replenishment stock earlier. You can see from this illustration that all three areas are designed to work together. Now, on the forecasting, again, there are a tremendous number of techniques, tools available. Looking at the aggregation techniques that we show here, we can depend on the individual customers. The individual customers are going to provide information, and we're going to pull it together into one consolidated forecast of demand. So this is called a bottom-up method. One of the advantages of this is that it gets the best information from the parties closest to the point of sale within their demographic regions. There may be demand that varies considerably between one region and another. A disadvantage is that the amount of time and work that's required to aggregate this information is longer than the alternative allocation technique. But nowadays, systems and processes are improving this data gathering and even providing some initial analysis in this area. So the allocation technique, we centralize the process. We do a top-down type of planning, and we allocate the inventories out to the various downstream users. And a forecast with the best available information is started at the top, with an advantage that it has a more consistent thought process. So the thought process doesn't have individual built-in local biases being injected into the logic, where you have the uncertainty of knowing what the agenda is behind certain sales numbers. Disadvantage is that the lower level of local qualitative and quantitative input makes it a little bit more subjective. So here you see forecasts being what we call consumed by orders and knowledge. As this chart is typically presented, you'd see two areas. You'd see the orders in the near term and the forecast demand over a longer period of time. Those of you that have seen this have recognized that. This one, citing the Jacobs book, Manufacturing Planning and Control for Supply Chain Management, he adds in knowledge. So by maintaining the solid lines of communication with customers, the knowledge gained here in the middle can generate a better plan during the critical time period when the aggregate supply lead time has such a high impact on delivery performance. So that knowledge in that region is extremely valuable to a company. There are different ways that orders consume the forecast, but, not getting into that level of detail, the only thing I want to say is that certain orders should not consume the forecast. So your company has a forecast. They say we're going to sell X number of units. Along comes an unplanned sales promotion. Maybe a salesperson promotes something in a newly established market. You don't want it to suck up the forecast that was designated for other areas of demand. So it would supplement, but you should not consume the forecast in those cases, if that makes sense. So just returning to the overall manufacturing planning hierarchy for a second, we again see the relationship between S&OP and master scheduling functions and how they fit into the whole hierarchy. But it's important to remember that capacity, over on the right-hand side, again, tying into supply or tying into operations. You've got resource planning and rough cut capacity planning. Important to remember that they need to be taken into consideration when you build your S&OP plan and your master schedule. At the S&OP level, supply and demand are balanced at the product family level. So up here in the top, number one, you see family of products. Let's use as an example Chevys versus Cadillacs. So that's the planning level at S&OP. The master schedule level, what that does is its function is to disaggregate this information from S&OP so that focus can be put onto specific end items. So General Motors has various plants around the country. They might have one plant that produces Chevys, but it's only dedicated to Chevy Cruzes. Another one might be dedicated to Malibus, another one Silverados. So we need to make sure that we have information at the sufficient level to be able to manage our production capabilities. So that's the end item as we would relate it to General Motors say. Typically, the planning cycle for S&OP is going to be on a monthly basis, and the master schedule is going to be weekly. Master scheduling creates the master production schedule for individual end items, quantities, and due dates. It's also supporting sales requests for information. So sales is going out there and they're saying, what do we have available? What do we have available to sell? So there's something called available to promise, and that's an output from these systems so that we can see what's been forecasted but not consumed. Getting back to the consumption, it hasn't been consumed by other hard orders yet. So I've got available capacity in a particular area. Again, capacity is also a consideration in master scheduling. Somebody has a question? I have my glasses on. Sorry, folks. um, okay, just to take a quick break here, I don't understand. Viewer 29 says, I don't understand when you say capacity, but one box says resource planning. It sounds bigger than that. I think he's going back to the a couple of slides ago. It sounds bigger than that. Would you go into more detail? Yeah, let's go back to, is it 2 or 1? Sorry, I've got a navigator. Lindsay's my navigator on the computer, so I'm not doing this all alone. I put the dotted yellow line or box around the resource planning and rough cut capacity planning areas. Just let's see, the resource planning is conducted up at an upper level. It's at the business level, so it ties in more with the business plan, the strategic plans. It's handling issues, capacities over a longer period of time. It manages at the higher level, product family, business level. The investment in that capacity is going to be higher. Remember that? We said we were talking about the technologies and the resources at that level would be higher, and it's needing top management to be involved. On the other, the RCCP ties into master planning, so we know that that's down at the end item level. Investment there is probably minimal. It's going to be low or no investment. It conforms to the MPS, shorter period of time, and it's driven by the master schedule, if I didn't say that before. So I hope that answers the question. If it doesn't, please, I'll tell you what, we'll probably move on and answer any follow-up question you may have at the end, if that's okay. Okay, so we're going to tie things together along the way. We've got this network. We've got the network of supply and demand. Here we see our master schedule. We have something called rough cut capacity planning we just talked about. So the resource and capacity planning. Look at the master scheduling process and the rough cut capacity planning side by side. We see that the master schedule disaggregates the production plan into end items like we talked about earlier, creating a statement of future production for specific products. Now, what the RCCP does is it converts this information into key resource requirements. It does it in different ways depending on the system, depending on the company's environment, sometimes using something called a bill of resources. So we can talk more about that in class, I guess, but there's a standard, typical bill of resources that can be used to aggregate the capacity requirements and give you an idea as to whether or not you're at least in the ballpark. So it compares, let's see, available capacity information to demand for that specific resource, and we'll show that in the next slide. Both are generally reviewed on a weekly basis, as you see down at the bottom. So this is simple, but it's illustrative of what should take place in a manufacturing operation when you're looking at your resource and capacity requirements. So looking at the resource production plans, they come together. This, just to make sure, we're only talking about manufacturing here. At this point in time, I want to focus. Manufacturing, we'll get into distribution capacity planning next. But master scheduling considers the resource and capacity issues by converting the master production schedule into requirements by key resource. So now we're getting down and we're parsing it even to another layer, another vertical layer that says you've got all your resources that are needed to meet your master production schedule. But you've got some at any point in time, some that were non-critical last week might be critical this week. Those that roll over to critical to plan are the ones that we want to focus on. Typically on a weekly basis, what happens is the systems, the MRP systems, various systems compare these key resources. The requirements are called load on this chart. So load under MPS needs to be compared to the available capacity. All resources don't need to be reviewed every week. Those that pop up on the radar as being critical to the plan are the ones that we want to focus on. We're going to manage, in this case, manage by exception. Then a comparison is made between the available resources and the load. So remember that the load is provided by the master production schedule. Looking at that again here. Each period is analyzed for its ability to meet the demand. Separate periods, separate resources, separate loads. So it's all coming together in the way that the manufacturing operation can use it best. This is reflected on the over-under row shown at the bottom. So the variance is going to show up, and we're going to use that to make changes either from period to period or in total. So I just put together a quick example. Didn't go out all 10 periods, all 10 weeks, whatever. You see a resource that has a capacity of 10 units per period. Week 1, period 1, let's call it week 1. We have load under MPS of 8. So we've got an available capacity of 2 more that we could produce there. Well, that's nice because in week 2, I've only got the ability to produce 10, but I've got demand for 12. So there you have your +2, -2, and that washes out. So that if I can pull those 2 forward, pre-produce them in period 1, I've got a over-under of 0, over-under of 0 in week 2, over-under of 0 in week 3, using 10 and 10. But now look what happens, period 4, period 5, you begin to see an uptick in the load, and it requires us to go back and maybe do a little bit more forensics, maybe go back and say, what is it that's needed? Is a little bit of capacity needed where we're going to work 10-hour days for a little bit and clean out this 13 weeks? Or do we anticipate a big dip? This is a spike. This is a promotional demand that's actually going to be offset by a dip in demand after, say, a 4th of July promotion. So DRP and capacity planning, in addition to manufacturing resource requirements, that's where we're going to look at distribution capacity requirements. There's inventory investment, transportation, warehouse space, labor and equipment, other factors depending on your environment, but this webinar is intended to give you just a general overview of the things that you need to look at. There's something called Logistics Resource Requirements Planning, or LRRP, and that's a program that can be used for this purpose. For planning and reporting to be most effective, we need to look at all 4, look at the overall inventory levels, the associated costs, transportation, its associated costs, warehouse space, not only the costs but the associated planning factors, and then all of the other allied functions, whether they be in-house, between areas of the supply chain, things like receiving, picking, packing, put away would be examples within the warehouse. So if all these categories can't support the projected demand, we need to make targeted changes. We make the targeted changes on the demand side, the distribution side here. We're talking about the distribution side of this now. We're ignoring the manufacturing side. So here we're only looking at changes in demand or changes in our distribution capacity. So physical components that need to be considered are whether we have the right IT structure, the IT infrastructure to all various areas within the distribution network, condition and availability of equipment, transportation equipment, in-house equipment, need for special handling areas. Some, depending on the needs, depending on what you're selling, you might need cross-docking capabilities, repacking capabilities, the ability for production facilities to physically store finished goods. There are a lot of mom and pop shops that came up, and they have great manufacturing facilities, but they never anticipated the demand to put a warehouse right alongside. They might be in the city where they have no room to expand. They're not going to be able to store their own finished goods. You're going to have to assess that situation and decide how you're going to cover those distribution requirements. And accessing regional and local warehouses. You look at this, and depending on your market, depending on the season, You might have a situation where your product is fairly seasonal, say, and your demand peak is in July, your demand lag is in December. Well, if you're going into a public warehouse and they have another company that they're servicing that has a peak in July and a trough in December, say, that may be problematic. So what you might want to do is look at different, if you're using public warehousing methods, might look at something that's going to be counter-seasonal or counter-cyclical to your needs. Hopefully this is all making sense. No, it must be perfectly making perfect sense because I'm not getting any other questions. So let's go to the systems and say systems serve as tools to manage the ever-changing and increasingly complex supply chain universe. I think everybody would agree to that. You look at the paper, listen to the news, you hear about Google and Amazon using drones and all of the intermodal changes, certainly the international expansion of markets and supply base are making this much more complex every day. With an ever-increasing demand for cost controls to remain competitive performance advantages, and advantages and disadvantages of increases in foreign competition and markets, these systems also have to deal with different functions as well. So they're not only dealing with different functions, they're also dealing with different geographic environments. So their functionality and our dependence on them continues to grow. Systems are becoming an ever-growing influence on planning and control activities. After we consider the people that we have, the people that are involved in our own supply chain, the most valuable resource that we have, systems are manufacturing and distribution's most valuable tool. Most systems overlap and communicate with each other. Many of them have been bundled into larger ERP, enterprise resource planning platforms. But the problem is what we're having now is a lot of the software suppliers are trying to make their products cover more and more markets. So they have the economy of scale. I have a system, you do what? Okay, my system will cover that. Systems decisions are becoming much more complicated because software companies are deciding to bundle their programs into one solution. So they blend it into something that's supposed to service all needs across various industries. Seldom is that the case. So nearly all companies now have to take that base platform, no matter how comprehensive it is, it's still a base upon which you want to do some degree of customization. Nearly all companies expect the ability to do customization to best mirror their specific operations and system requirements. So that's the beginning of it. That's the system startup, the mirroring, the comparison of your existing requirements to available systems. What I'll tell you is that that's not the end. Obviously, as the dynamics of your customer expectations, the supply changes, your suppliers are going to a different country, a least cost country, something like that, you're going to have to go back and analyze this. A good way to do it is just use a SWOT technique, look at what the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are to your existing system, including breaching it, the security. As you get a broader and broader supply chain, more often than not, you're putting information across that supply chain that has holes in it if you don't look at the weaknesses or the threats associated with it. So what I would tell you is sit down as a cross-functional group, assess some of the problems that you've been having with your systems, at least on an annual basis, and evaluate whether or not they're robust enough and appropriate for the direction that the company is going. DRP, distribution requirements planning. So we talked about manufacturing resource planning. We're going to talk about DRP for a second. It considers when, where, and how much distribution network inventory is going to be needed, along with the resources that are necessary for timely delivery and storage. The DRP system is going to provide information back to the S&OP and MPS functions so that we can ensure channel resources are available and inventories are allocated to the lowest level stocking points. That's a little bit more to take in than we're going to cover in the webinar here, but there's a lot of detail in just that statement. Distribution relies on data that's used for planning at both the family and the item level. We've gone through that before. This is one of the reasons that DRP systems need to give and take information from both the S&OP and the MPS databases. So you've got different things within distribution centers, regional, local, even at the retail level, that rely on information that's going to be pushed back to central planning in aggregate. So you've got family related information being pushed back up, and discrete item levels, point of sale devices. Just telling you exactly what color of paint you purchased, as opposed to how many gallons of paint you need for the following week. So while this is illustrated in a simple table on this side, it's a lot more complex. And as I said, we're going to talk about this in a lot more detail in the four-day classes. The role of manufacturing planning and control with its S&OP and master scheduling activities, right, is to balance objectives. And it's balance objectives, resolve conflicts. So along with the prototypical systems, a lot of the things that we've talked about, the capacity planning, the different resource planning systems, there are other areas, other techniques, systems, Lean Six Sigma, theory of constraints. These things complement what we just talked about, and they also can help mitigate conflict among these three objectives of customer service, inventory investment, cost of production. So they can do that by accelerating process throughput, reducing inventory costs, employing cellular or other types of lean production methods, and other areas that they can help in. So what's the bottom line? Policies need to be developed based on critical criteria. So the policies in the middle have the criteria of meeting customer lead time requirements, preparing accurate forecasts, et cetera. These policies need to support customer service levels on the right that meet or exceed the customer's expectations. Not only that, but challenge the best that the competition has to offer. Sometimes customers don't know what they have available or what they don't know. So you need to look at your competition as much as you do your customer expectations, because your customer expectations can change on a dime if all of a sudden your competition is out there doing something that's radically better than what you're doing. So make sure that your policies are evaluated based on your criteria, based on what your customer expectations are, but also what your competition has to offer you see coming down the pike. We need to establish policies and expect adherence to them, not only internally, but through the entire supply chain. So we can't just talk to our purchasing folks and say, you need to conform, but not expect our suppliers to also adhere to those policies that we've put in place. So these need to meet customers' ever-changing service expectations, including continually shrinking lead times, right goods and services, quality, quantity, time, place, and price that we started out with. So today, hopefully we haven't gone too broad or too deep, but just right to give a good understanding as to what MPR is. But going back to that area of the larger chart, we focused on the conversion of strategic and business plans into viable demand plans. These viable demand plans are viable because we recognize the constraints, that they're constrained by available resources over the short and intermediate term, long term. I think the question, hopefully I answered it adequately, that the resource planning piece of this addresses the long-term requirements. So during this webinar, we've considered operational constraints, market demands, distribution resource requirements, and hopefully you found this webinar interesting, informative, and most of all, I know that I've put the plug in a couple times, but hopefully it piques your curiosity enough to sign up for the upcoming Master Planning and Resources class and other APICS programs. We've got excellent programs out there, and I appreciate the time. Hopefully I've generated some more curiosity and interest in this area. So just on the course content, I want to make sure that everybody understands that there are even areas that are coming into the course that haven't even been touched on. So we'll learn how to use data and analytics to improve sales. I think a few people would say that that's pretty valuable stuff. Understanding the guidelines for evaluating forecasts, not just how do we create them, but how do we evaluate them, make modifications. Master the advanced planning and scheduling methods, handling major changes in customer orders, planning for products and process engineering changes, better understanding. We talked about bills of distribution. We didn't talk about bills of resources, but there are a lot of, the world's not just built on bills of material. So there are other bills that we use to create generic forecast activities. Recognizing distribution site location factors, we can get into some of the dynamics on how you know how many places and where they could be positioned. And finally, establishing integrated performance measurements. So, any additional questions? You can talk. We'll be sending out the presentation.
Is that from James?
Oh, James. James said that the presentation is going to be put onto the website, I believe, almost immediately after this. So, if you have anybody, that's a good point, Lindsay. If you have anybody that's not been subject to this webinar, and you want to have them listen to it, it's going to be on the apixtampabay.org website, and you can direct them there. So remember, Master Planning of Resources, we're going to have 4 consecutive Saturdays in the Carrollwood area, starting on April 9th. It's designed to help you pass the APICS exam, the MPR exam, toward the CPIM certification. But I'd ask you to register by Friday, April 1st, to make sure that I can order the materials, your participants' guides and whatnot, and get them in time for the first class. You can go to apixtampabay.org under upcoming events, or you can call me. You can call me on my cell phone if you want, in the office. Okay. Do we have any more questions?
Greg?
Okay.
This is James.
Yes, sir.
I just want to thank you for this presentation on behalf of APICS Tampa Bay. My head almost exploded with all the salient information that you provided, and I just want to thank you for that. And we're going to take any questions that anyone may have in our chat box.
Yeah, likewise, I'll follow James by saying thank you, everybody, for taking the time out of your busy days to spend an hour with me.